welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host, Kirill, and today we have Professor Ivanov from the University of Cincinnati returning to Samuel's Fortress, and we'll be discussing a whole host of topics. So, Professor Ivanov, welcome back to the channel. How are you this afternoon?
Thank you so much, Kirill. It's always a pleasure to be back on your channel and to talk to you and your wonderful audience. And thank you. I'm feeling very well and very happy to be back. Thank you.
No, it's great to have you back on the channel, and I'm sure my audience is looking forward to this discussion as they were with the previous one. So, like I said, there's a whole host of topics we kind of agreed to discuss before we started this video. And I think the main topic, or the first one we should kind of get into, is the recent parliamentary elections in Bulgaria. Those were held this past weekend on Sunday. Was that April 2nd?
Yes, that was on April 2nd, yes.
On April 2nd. And before we started here today, I pulled the most recent results that I could find. I think these are the most, the final results, the official numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it looks like the party with the highest percentage of votes was Gerb with 25.39%, giving them 69 out of the 240 seats. That's a gain of 2 seats since the previous election, which wasn't too long ago. And then the second most seats were awarded to a coalition of We Continue to Change and Democratic Bulgaria. That coalition got 23.55% of the vote, giving them 64 out of the 240 seats. That's a loss of 9 seats from the last election. So they, went down, obviously. In third place, there is Revival, Konstantin Konstantinov's party. They got 13.58% of the votes, giving them 37 seats, a gain of 10. So they appear to be the biggest winners by amount of seats gained. Then we have the Movement for Rights and Freedoms. That's the de facto, I think, Turkish party within the country. They received 13.15% of the vote, giving them 36 seats. No change from the previous election. Then we have the Bulgarian Socialist Party with 8.56% of the vote. That gives them 23 seats, a loss of 2 seats. I think that's probably one of the worst performances for the socialists
ever.
Okay.
In 20th and 21st century, since their party was created, basically.
Okay, and obviously they're going down into the single digits, so not too bright of a future for that party, it looks like. And then finally, There Is Such a People came back into the parliament with just under, or just about 4% if you round up. I think the final number is 3.94%. And that gives them 11 seats, which is a gain of 11 since they were not previously in the parliament. And then all the other parties received less than 4% of the vote, which does not give them any seats. There's a 4% threshold for entrance into the parliament. Now, with all that being said, it's clear by the numbers that no one really got a majority. You have basically 2 parties that are kind of neck and neck, Gerb, and then the coalition of We Continue to Change in Democratic Bulgaria. I guess my first question to you, as someone who I'm sure follows domestic politics in Bulgaria closer than I do, is it possible to form a government with the current results, or are we going to be back at the ballot box within a few months once more?
I think both scenarios are fairly plausible. I think the chances of forming a coalition is more likely than not forming one. And so I was engaged with the process here in Cincinnati. I was actually part of the board of elections for the precinct. We were able to get enough people to have and we've been able to have a precinct here in Cincinnati. So there's 5 of us serving on that board, So of course the results in Cincinnati, Chicago area, or in the United States overall, are somewhat different than the national results. But, we're glad and happy that Bulgarians around the globe have an opportunity to turn up and show up and vote. And we've had here people come from drive like 2-3 hours from the state of Ohio, down from Kentucky, from places like Louisville, to come and cast their votes. So the bottom line is that for a Bulgarian media, the day of the elections, we didn't even know because they were running neck to neck, the first and the second. So the GERB and the coalition, the Continue with Change / Democratic Bulgaria. So I said, either way it turns out, it seems that the former Prime Minister Borisov is going to be the kingmaker, you know.
Okay.
In other words, he's got to decide. So at this point, there's been a surprise silence on the part of all the political parties. At this point, there's some signals coming from this. So there's two ways to go about this. The kingmaker basically can go in two directions. One is the so-called broad coalition, which is what the West, the United States, the Americas have been pushing, that the GERB would form sort of a pro-Western, pro-Atlantic foreign policy kind of, we call it a foreign policy coalition, with the Continue with Change. Now, Continue with Change, they made a coalition with the Democratic Bulgaria, so they would come on the top. And the idea was at least to replicate, if not even do better. If you look at the net numbers, like from the last three, for about a year, a little bit over a year and a half, they've been losing the votes from combined from like 850,000 down to like 611. So they've lost a lot of votes. And surprisingly, many of their voters have gone to Возрождение, the Приrodbo, the rebirth, the revival / rebirth, whatever, political party, which is sort of a pro-Russian, anti-systemic, you know. And interestingly, in United States and around the globe, they get actually more votes than even they get in Bulgaria, you know. These are people who are not happy with the system in Bulgaria, but are also not happy with the Western political system. They're completely anti-systemic votes. And this process of political crisis without government actually continues to fuel them. So everybody now realizes that this party continues to grow, and that's a serious threat for the political system itself in Bulgaria. So that's one of the reasons to consider why. And I know some of you are actually viewers, maybe fans of this political party. So I'm not trying to take a side whether I like no, but the truth is that they're very anti-systemic party, and it's a very much highly a protest vote. You know?
And by anti-systemic, I'm assuming it means kind of anti-establishment, anti-European, kind of European in the sense of the European Union, perhaps. Is that fair to say that they're maybe opposed to kind of further European integration, or they're more Eurosceptic, to use, you know, kind of that?
Well, and they're pro-Russian, or at least the way that they present the position is that we should remain neutral in the war in Ukraine, meaning that basically we don't want to take any sides, you know. We should not get engaged in any way. One of the rumors or misconceptions that they've been spreading is that Bulgaria is going to send military personnel to Ukraine, and so the argument is vote for us so you don't have your kids sent to fight a war in Ukraine on behalf of NATO. They argued that the euro is not a good currency, that Bulgaria should preserve its left. Bulgaria has de facto euro introduced because the Bulgarian left is fixed to the euro, so it makes no difference. You know, it only makes sense to get rid of the left so that the money in reserve that we have now can be part of it can be released, basically, because now you're part of the eurozone. But
is that a current debate in Bulgaria? I've seen that recently, but I haven't paid too close of attention. Is Bulgaria looking to drop the lev completely, or?
Yes. So when the EU accession started, all the countries that joined the EU, they were given an option at one point down the road that they will join the Eurozone. But because the way that the Eurozone criteria were set up, it was clearly said that you cannot do it immediately, in part because as you join, most of them are poorer than the mean in the EU. So you're going to have a higher inflation as your wages go up, you know. So it takes time to catch up. And once you catch up, you meet all the criteria, you will join. Bulgaria started during the Borisov's years, actually, in 2017 or 2018 started a process of entering. So in 2019 and 2020, they were admitted into sort of the waiting room of the Eurozone. So to a process of preparing to drop the left and to introduce the euro. And for Bulgaria and for the Baltic countries, it made sense because they had a currency board regime. Basically, their currency was fixed to the whether it's a dollar or euro, to a more stable currency. That was a way in the 90s to stabilize the economy. So, for example, for Romania, for the Czech Republic and Poland, it makes sense for them to wait and preserve their national currency. For Bulgaria, because of the currency board regime, it doesn't make sense. But of course, there's an expectation that you have to meet all the requirements. And so what happens is, because of the COVID crisis, Bulgaria has now a higher budget deficit than it's required, even though there was a waiver for that. And most importantly, Bulgaria has higher inflation. The requirement is to have the three countries with your inflation shouldn't be higher than the three countries with the lowest, Eurozone countries with the lowest inflation. And Bulgaria's had a very high inflation. And that's normal, partially because of the war in Ukraine, the energy resources that went up, but also partly because Bulgaria has been poor. So as the wages go up, it drives also the inflation up,
Sure. Okay, so let's go back to the, that's very interesting. Let's go back to the election results. Briefly, I just want to talk about the Revival Party of Возрождение. It seems that the other kind of right-wing parties have disappeared altogether, and it seems like all of them are kind of, at least this is my perception, kind of funneling into that one party. For example, VMRO, the Bulgarian VMRO or IMRO, looks to me like they've completely disappeared from the political scene. Is that true?
They chose not to participate in the election.
Okay.
There was some initial plans that they would join a broader coalition with Radev's party, the Bulgarian upbringing, the Bulgarian Progress for Bulgaria,
Okay.
But then they decided, for some reason that I'm not aware of, they decided that this is not going to work, and then they intentionally decided that they were going to not participate, and they encouraged their supporters to vote. There's an option you have a list of political parties, and then there's one, I don't support anyone, and that actually got more votes than the last party that made it through the threshold, which was Slavy Trifunov's kind of brigade, maverick, anti-establishment sort of party. So this guy, I don't support anybody, got more votes. So it's almost like 4.8%.
Right.
But what I was going to say is that the interesting phenomenon is that the other, yes, I mean, they all got sucked into Возрождение and the Revival Party. But the reality is that Konstantin Konstantinov, his political career started with VMRO. He was a member of the board. He was an activist of IMRO or VMRO political party. Then he had some disagreements, from what I remember, with Karakachanov and Chapasky, and so he kind of split from them. And during that period, he created the Возрождение or the rebirth, the revival, as an alternative to the as a competition to VMRO. But again, remember, he played on also the pro-Russian, and he picked very well-targeted populist approach, sort of anti-vaxxer campaign. So he became the face of anti-vaxxer campaign, including some of the people who were around him, people that were kind of clearly affiliated with Moscow, were using also the internet and other media to amplify this anti-vaxxer campaign. In Bulgaria now, they're very effective in sort of the preservation of the left campaign, and they're arguing that they're not against the EU per se, but they think that Bulgaria has entered on unfavorable conditions, and so he's going to sit down and renegotiate, just like in Macedonia, they're trying to renegotiate the accession framework. Some political parties in Bulgaria, he's trying to renegotiate the conditions. That's absolutely bullshit. Nobody's going to take him seriously, in Europe, just like the Macedonians were trying to renegotiate. Nobody's going to take them seriously. But the reality is that this, and he knows. Kostadinov is a very, very smart, very skillful, very adaptable politician, and I give him all the credit for that. And he knows how to pick issues and how to make them an issue, how to make this issue at the centerpiece. So he knows how to exploit this rhetoric in his support. So yes, and the interesting thing is, many of the people who vote for continuing the change, they actually switch sides. It's almost like 70,000 votes, which is a substantial percentage from last year's elections, have switched sides and have voted for Vozrozhdeny, which is, to me, it's almost shocking, because they're the alter ego of the political foreign policy.
That's what I was going to say. It seems a little strange. I'm just kind of looking at the
70,000
explicit ideology or positions of those two parties. It seemed very radically different. So it seems strange that someone would jump from that coalition of We Continue to Change and Democratic Bulgaria to the
But I saw
party.
the same thing in Cincinnati. So we have about 15 votes for Vozrozhdeny. We had between 13 and 15 votes, and it's usually, I wouldn't say always the same people, but the core is very similar. And then there's, of course, people who come and who may or may not come, and others who don't have turned it up in the past. So from 15 votes, we went up to 20 votes. And those were clearly people who previously voted for anti-GERB, sort of anti-establishment parties, and now they sided with Vozrozhdeny. So,
and I don't know if this is entirely true. This is kind of what I saw initially, that a lot of the votes coming from outside Bulgaria, the majority of them were for the We Continue to Change, the Democratic Bulgaria coalition. Is that correct?
Yes. We had 62 out of 108 votes, so it's over 50% of the votes. Let's put it this way. Vozrozhdeny is usually second, except in Turkey, where 90% of the votes go for the MRF, the Turkish party. But that has traditionally been, and so Continue with the Change is the strongest performing party overseas. GERB performs much weaker, even though a couple of years ago GERB was always on the top, but since 2021 they have been underperforming, and they're also losing votes from 21 up until now. They've been losing votes too. So I think they're the third political party after Vozrozhdeny, or maybe I should say after MRF. So it's Continue with the Change, the Turkish political party, Vozrozhdeny, and then GERB. Socialists got 0 votes in our precinct, which was weird, and they got almost no votes from abroad, which is why they're. But what I was going to say is that, interestingly, now talking about coalitions, I think Boyko Borisov has signaled right before they disassembled the previous assembly, before they went for early elections, that he was willing to work with the socialists, which is problematic, and socialists have indicated that they're willing to work with him. So it's clear that Borisov and the MRF, the Turkish party, have been in collaboration, although they've never had a formal coalition since basically Borisov came to power in 2009. They've always had some tacit cooperation. And now this is going to become clear and explicit. The question is, will the socialists join? And so this is the second alternative to the Grand Coalition. And they have the votes. They have, I think, the three parties: the GERB, the MRF, and the socialists together. I think 128 votes. They need 121. So it's a slim majority, but it's enough to form a government. And I think this is the more likely outcome that is going to happen to form a coalition. And so the Continue with the Change are in a very tough spot. If they join a coalition with Borisov, everybody who has joined Borisov in coalition since 2009 have disappeared from the political spectrum since then. So they know that. That's why they don't want to enter a coalition. Problem is that if they stay out in deep opposition, they're also losing support, because their supporters voted for them. They wanted him to come on the top,
right,
to form. And once they're not able to do that, their support is waning. So their support is waning regardless of whether they're going to join a coalition with Borisov or not. The bigger issue is that they need to do reforms, including constitutional reforms, where the prosecutors, because we have a chief prosecutor in Bulgaria who's problematic, that's been criticized by the West. Bulgaria has been denied entry into the Schengen and the Eurozone.
Right.
And part of the reason is the Schengen was that Bulgaria has a problem with the rule of law, that the prosecutor serves special interests. And so what they want to do is they want to create, either get rid of that office of the attorney general or chief prosecutor's office and leave down to the prosecutors themselves, or create somebody who can monitor and exercise control over that. Either way, they will need to amend the constitution, for which you need 2/3, and then you also need to pass a package of judiciary reforms, a legislative package, and for all of those, they will need the votes. So that's going to be actually the bigger issue that this new assembly will have to tackle.
Okay, so basically, just kind of recap, there seems to be three options: either get it forms a coalition with We Continue to Change Democratic Bulgaria as one option. Second option would be get it forms one, as you're saying, with the socialists and the Turkish party, the movement for rights and freedoms. And then I guess the third option is no one forms a coalition, and we're back to the ballot box later this year sometime. So
yes.
Do you mind if I ask you personally, why, first of all, why people abroad, Bulgarians abroad, vote for the We Continue to Change Democratic Bulgaria coalition by, seems like a wider margin than the other parties, or at least, the Bulgarians in Bulgaria. And then if you don't mind sharing which party you support and why you think that's why you support them, essentially.
Okay, so yes, sure. Why people vote for We Continue the Change? So I think, and Democratic Bulgaria, they get a lot stronger support overseas, abroad. I think it's very much depends on the profile of the voters. So Bulgarian parties are not so clearly ideological, and their ideology is adaptable to the kind of voters that you have. So GERB turned out to be a more people's party, sort of, which is sort of center right. But over the years, it evolved away from the ideology of the center-right European People's Party. This is the family that they belong to. And it became more of a sort of a workers' party. And they argue that much of their votes that they get is based on, particularly from smaller, more rural community, where, again, let's put it this way, less educated people live. And in a lot of the cases, they argue there is because there's either local entrepreneurs, businessmen, or people who are employed by the local municipalities, many of whom are controlled by GERB. So they're like, I have to be loyal to the party because the party also provides me employment opportunities. So which sometimes in political science, as you probably I've heard, it's called the patron-client relations.
Right.
So there is some sense of patronage and clientelism. So that's why they get a lot more votes in Bulgaria than outside. Outside of Bulgaria, generally people who are left the country are very critical and skeptical towards socialism, communism, and the left wing, because those ideas have not brought a lot of good to Bulgaria. And then they're all now skeptical about GERB, because one of the reasons why GERB has been having a hard time, even though they won the last 3 out of 5 election cycles in the last 2 years, they're having a hard time to form government because nobody wants to be with them, and nobody wants to be with them because there's allegations for corruption schemes that Borisov has been heavily criticized. So I would be honest with you, I've always, in the last 5 cycles, voted for one political party. Well, now for the coalition, but before that, I voted for Democratic Bulgaria because they are center right in ideology, so moderate right. I am not a left winger, even though some people think that. Yes, I support liberal ideas, but I am not a left not a left-wing liberal ideas, more of a centrist,
Sure.
both
I
in
know a lot of people
American and
criticized you as
yeah.
being a little too far left in our last video.
Yeah,
So
I got that, and they
yeah,
will probably continue that conversation. I can
that's okay.
imagine some of the comments there,
Sure.
but
That's the
also,
Возрождение
yeah,
audience on my channel.
and that's fine. I actually would really love to hear, and there's a lot of people also here in Cincinnati, and have an honest conversation with them.
Sure.
Do they really want to see Bulgaria leave the EU? How they reimagine some negotiations, and particularly Bulgaria's relations with Russia, which I am. I mean, I have huge respect for Russian people, Russian culture, but I'm appalled by what Putin is doing in Ukraine, and for that reason, there's no way I can. This is just basically a clear cut, black and white, if you want to put it, aggressor and victim approach from international law, from international politics perspective. So I understand some of the GERB voters. Some of them are my relatives. I cannot imagine. I watched the last few interviews that Borisov gave. I cannot imagine myself voting for this guy. It's just there's no circumstances under which I can see myself voting. I sympathize with the idea of reforms generally, and parties that are favoring reforms, and I have some criticism and skepticism about how Continue with the Change has operated, has approached politics, has dealt. I think they've made, I give them all the credit. The two guys are Harvard graduates. Accession is a schoolmate of one of my best friends from high school in Bulgaria. Not Georgi, our friend but I have another friend of mine with whom I studied in college in Bulgaria. So he's certainly been very smart and very gifted, but they were overconfident. They made statements and they made mistakes that they were not supposed to do, and I think that has undermined support in them. So I would like them to do, not just in the campaign, but in overall politics, to behave very differently. They are overconfident and they're fostering some divisions. I like the fact that Hristo Ivanov, who is the leader of the Democratic Bulgaria, has taken a much more moderate approach, much more common sense. So he's the common sense guy in the coalition, which is what we need. And you know me, Kirill, I am a common sense. I can talk to the left and I can talk to the right. I was supporter when 3 elections ago, 2 scores ago, was supporter of the idea that Continue with the Change in Democratic Bulgaria should form a coalition with the socialists, as painful as it was, because we needed to have a fresh start. Now, once this coalition fell apart, I think, to be honest with you, my position right now is that I would not like this Continue with the Change to form a coalition with GERB, because they need to still draw the distinction. But GERB has a potential to form a coalition with like-minded political parties. They have the votes. They just need to work out the details. And I want them to run the country, because we need to have a government. It doesn't matter what I like it. You need to have a government. Any government is better than no government at all. And it's their call. They're the winners, and I give them credit for doing that.
Okay. Well, I think that was a good breakdown of the elections, and I think we'll probably move on to some other topics that we wanted to discuss. I think the kind of other main topic that was on the plate for today was the EU accession process for Macedonia, and specifically the Bulgarian demands, or requirements, I guess, for lifting the veto, as it's often described as. So as of recently, I don't know when this kind of shift happened, but there was a lot of emphasis put on the change of the Macedonian constitution to add a Bulgarian minority into the preamble, where there's already a number of different ethnic groups listed, Albanians, Turks, Vlachs, Croatians, Bosniaks. I mean, there's a whole host of people in there. But the Bulgarians are not listed in the preamble of the Macedonian constitution. And that is one of the requirements from Bulgaria in order to allow Macedonia's EU accession process to move forward. I've been critical of this being a main focus of the Bulgarian government, of kind of being placed on the top of the list of Bulgarian demands. For those who watched my most recent interview with Viktor Kanzurov, I think for those of you who understand Macedonian and Bulgarian, which isn't all of my audience, but for those of you who watched and understood that video, he was also very critical of this being the chief demand of Bulgaria. Basically, the criticism here is that it is too little. It's not enough of a demand in order to allow Macedonia to move forward. It doesn't really solve the issues which exist between the two states, that nothing really changes if Bulgarians are added to the preamble of the Macedonian constitution. I certainly agree with this sentiment. I've stated that I don't understand what change this will achieve. It doesn't address any of the main topics, which to me are historically based. I think the biggest disputes between the two states are in regard to the shared history of the two countries, of the two nations, and basically putting the Bulgarians in the Macedonian constitution doesn't address those issues. Furthermore, I think that nothing stops the Macedonians from changing the constitution after Bulgaria, quote unquote, lifts the veto. So, for example, let's say the Bulgarians are added to the constitution in Macedonia, which requires a 2/3 majority, which currently there isn't one. But let's assume that there's enough political will in Macedonia to add the Bulgarians to the constitution, to amend the preamble. Nothing's stopping them from then changing the constitution, saying, well, we're going to have a Bulgarian style constitution that doesn't list any ethnic groups. We're just going to say, this constitution is applicable to the citizens of North Macedonia. Or, recently I saw that Vomero Dopamane was proposing some sort of Croatian style constitution where I guess I'm not familiar with the Croatian constitution, but apparently the ethnic Croatians are obviously the chief ethnic group of the country. It's their kind of nation state, and then a list of minorities are listed, who also live in the country. I guess what Vomero is trying to do is list the ethnic Macedonians as the constituent ethnic group, which form the core of the North Macedonian nation state, and then all the other ethnic groups will be subordinated as minority groups. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not a great demand, because even if Bulgarians are added, nothing's stopping the Macedonians from then changing the constitution later to remove them or subordinate them to another status. And then again, nothing is solved, and nothing has been really achieved. So what do you think, from your point of view, is the constitutional change to add the Bulgarians to the preamble a good exchange for Bulgaria, allowing Macedonia to proceed on its EU integration, or is something more needed from your point of view?
So I completely agree with you, and the rationale that Kanzurov, who really knows what's happening in Macedonia, who understands Macedonian politics, and I'm on the same page with both of you. I went even a step further and I said, listen, the only thing that Bulgaria gets out of it is the distinction that there are currently Macedonian people, and there are Macedonian Bulgarians or Macedonian Bulgarians, and these are two different groups. Now, lots of people in Bulgaria, including liberal-minded people who were candidates for representatives from the Continue with Change Democratic Bulgaria list, argue, oh no, we should have never asked for that, because the distinction is only in semantics, that pretty much we're the same people, And I'm like, no, we're not, because identity-wise, we are different. The majority Macedonians feel that they have nothing to do with Bulgarians, And a small group, the census of 21 showed 3,504 people. 2 of them passed away. 1 declared himself. So it's somewhere in the 3,500 people range, identified themselves as Bulgarian. So is this the accurate number? Would it be possible that some people declared themselves as Macedonians, even though they felt like Macedonians? Probably, but not tons, more. So there's not like hundreds of thousands of people that identify themselves. And so it makes sense to draw this distinction, So that's the only thing that Bulgaria gains. That's why Bulgaria never raised this issue in the last 30 years, In fact, initially it was written with the Macedonian people, and when the amendments were done, one in 2001, one in, I think, at a later stage, they added the Serbs, they added the Vlachs, the Albanians, of course, the Turks. I think these are the only 4 nationalities that were included in the constitution. They're not called nationalities, but groups of people. So it's the Macedonian people and the groups of peoples, that include the Turks, the Albanians, the Turks, the Vlachs, the Serbs, etc. And so I believe at that time there was a communication between Bulgarian diplomats and Macedonian authorities, and they asked them, "Oh, what about including the Bulgarians? People who feel like Bulgarians." Bulgarians said, "No, we're not interested." And again, the Bulgarian diplomats were convinced that this is it's not working in our interest of common and shared history to make this distinction. But the reality is, it now feeds a lot of the Macedonist propaganda and anti-Bulgarian propaganda, Macedonian nationalist anti-Bulgarian propaganda, arguing, hey, Bulgarians never recognized our nation, our language, and our identity. They trying to impose on us that we're Bulgarians and to Bulgarify us, or Bulgarize us, and so now that Bulgaria has put this demand forward, it was actually a demand by a group of Macedonian Bulgarians. Again, how representative this group was is again another issue to talk about, but this group raised this issue, and so it was actually, when Bulgaria raised initially, it has initially 5 demands. This was added as the 6th, and it was known as the 5+1. One of them was already completed, so that was basically Bulgaria asked Macedonia to send a declaration saying that North Macedonia and the Republic of North Macedonia is the same thing, so we're not claiming period Macedonian, and so the Macedonians did that, and that was it pretty much, So that was the +1, and the +1 became number 1, in this power vacuum under the leadership of Radev, But I think there is a growing consensus in Bulgarian public. Again, Bulgarian public was a little bit manipulated, that this will fix the problem. Yeah, and I completely agree with you and with Kansurov that this is not going to fix anything. But it's a nice litmus test, something that, let's see how the society feels. So let's just try to put the litmus test and see whether that society is, because the real test is you give them something small in the beginning. That's my argument. And you test them whether they're willing to take it. So in exchange for EU membership. And the very divisions that it opened up, it kind of shows you that clearly that this society is shaking, and it keeps the debate on the surface. So now the big debate is because the Bulgarian constitution said the Bulgarian people. That's what it says in the preamble. It means, I don't care what your identity is, I don't care what your nationality is. You live in Bulgaria, you're part of the Bulgarian people. And then inside the constitution, you're a citizen. That's it, citizens of Bulgaria. Now, Croatia says in the preamble, it's the Croatian people and the following minorities.
Right.
And it lists like 20 or 30, including Bulgarians, Macedonians, etc. Now, the Macedonian constitution, it's the Macedonian people and the other groups of peoples. And I made a mistake actually saying that Bulgarians are a minority, and then watch out, don't tell Bulgarians in Bulgaria that Bulgarians in Macedonia are a minority, because they're a part of people, they're a constituent part of people. They are the very history of Macedonia, which in fact is very, very true. But today, it's a matter, and now the big debate I was listening today is the semantics. If you call them minorities, you are kind of almost offending this group of people, like they're minor group or inferior group in comparison to the majority of the population. And so, but if you put them as a parts of nations, or parts of people, then you're recognizing their constitutive element. And of course, Bulgarians are problematic because they're questioning the historical record, they're questioning Macedonian identity. That's why, not because you want to discriminate them, but because you want to discriminate against their historical narrative. And we can talk a little bit more later about the historical narrative, but I think this is the case where Bulgaria needs to be very clear. Bulgaria has not removed the four other requirements. They are there. They're very clear, and we can show them if you want to at a later point. We can project.
No, we can go over that now just to be kind of clear what the
it's
demands
the
are.
first slide, second slide from the first batch.
Okay.
And so those are there, and so this is a myth in Macedonia. That this is the only demand. But here's where I differ from others who say that history should have been a precondition for starting the negotiations. I think this conversation on history is going to be a difficult one. I think this is a conversation that is going to take, Kirill, a long time. And at least majority of that conversation should be completed before the accession. That's why if we had put that as a precondition, fix your history record, fix your textbooks, and then we can give you a green light. This will take a long time. Now we have the 10 years to come, at least, maybe even more, where Macedonia, North Macedonia, will be negotiating for EU membership, to use that time also to start a debate. And again, myself as an ethnic Bulgarian, you as an American with Bulgarian Macedonian identity from or whatever. I don't want to define your identity, whatever. Your identity is Ohrid identity. Okay, I think that is a strong.
Let's go with that.
That's and all of us, ultimately, people living outside of Macedonia, we can weigh in this debate, but this is a debate that has to take place in the Macedonian society. It goes through all the stages, psychological stages. We're now in the stage of negation, but we need to continue this conversation, and that conversation will take time. So now Bulgaria moved that as a top demand, a constitutional amendment, which is again the +1 demand. Now, from a tactics and strategic point of view, you have, and Kanzurov has a great reason to say, I'm not sure that this was a smart thing. Well, my response is, I'm not sure that Bulgarian policy with regard to Macedonia has been smart in the last 100 and something years. So it fits very well that not smart policy perspective. But I think it was a nice litmus test. And it's, again, something that Bulgaria has literally made a concession from its policies. But Bulgaria has on the other 4. And so I've listed them 4. I think 3 are core, and then the 4th one is more of it's important, but not as important as number. So number 1 is the rehabilitation of the victims of communism in the Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, especially those with Bulgarian identity. And again, I know there was an effort to do that during the Gruevski regime rule, but this was more of a cover-up, because the problem is that, and it again rests with the historical narrative. Historical narrative is Macedonian nation was born by the anti-fascist fight against Bulgarian fascists and Bulgarians, and it was a fight led by the communists, So the communists were so great because they created a Macedonian state, modern Macedonian state. So Macedonians finally got a state. Okay. But remember, these people did a lot of terrible things, and a lot of people who did not support that regime, who were somehow affiliated with a different idea, with different identity, and mostly with non-communist ideologies, not just pro-Western, but the whole spectrum of non-communist ideologies. were repressed. They were repressed, some of them, in large part of them because they felt Bulgarians, others because they were anti-communist and non-communist. Even the very ASNOM members, starting from Chento, going through Pavel Shatev, they were terribly repressed, you know.
Yeah, and that's another thing I've gone over in previous videos on the channel is, you know, even the communist partisans in Macedonia after the war were repressed by the Yugoslav regime because they were opposed to the, you know, centralization, the Yugoslavization, you could say, of Macedonia. So even a lot of the communists themselves were repressed by the, you know, central authorities in Belgrade. So it wasn't just anti-communist, although those were obviously the main targets of Yugoslav repression.
And Macedonization also on an anti-Bulgarian foundation of the nation. So it's not the Macedonization per se, but anti-Bulgarian Macedonization, you know.
Right.
And so now, of course, the problem is much of those archives, some of them are in Skopje, many of them are in Belgrade, which puts Skopje in a position where the government has to go and ask for those archives from Belgrade, release them, and also find a way. And I know people, I mean, on Facebook and others who are from, for example, the family of the Krushevo Republic, you know, and this was one of the founding families of Macedonian, the idea of Macedonian state, you know, and they were terribly replaced. Merchants, you know, many of them, of course, fled to Bulgaria or other parts of the world, but they're raising their voice now. The Sekulovi family, for example, who was the great-grandfather was the Minister of Health in the Krushevo Republic, so back in 1903. So they're asking, say, we need to have we need to receive rehabilitation because we were oppressed. And so this goes back to, again, the historical narrative that, and again, this is a way Bulgaria touches upon the historical narrative. If you want to move forward as a society, you need to bring an inclusive narrative about the past. Not to say the partisans were good and everybody else was bad. You know,
right.
Everybody was okay. And a lot of other societies went through that process. So I think it's a good demand. Bulgaria went through a similar process at home. Macedonia didn't really, or just did a sort of a cover-up story, and it has to go through it. Number two is prevention of hate speech against Bulgaria and North Macedonia. So that includes two types of hate speech. One is in the public discourse. This is, they argue, but how can I control the public discourse? Everybody has the freedom to write and think, well, yeah, but there is public media, particularly TV stations or internet portals where that fall under the regulation of the whatever local body. And then, of course, some of the statements that are put there. And, you know, our friends in Corridor 8 went through some of those that were published literally a few months ago, arguing that Bulgarians are, I hate to say that, prostitutes, you know, or stuff like this. I mean, this is obviously a hate speech, you know. That's not okay, you know. And so that should quit, you know, the Macedonians should quit, you know. But the more important thing, the more tangible thing that Bulgaria put is that you have a lot of monuments building all over Macedonia now, North Macedonia, I should say. And so some of them commemorate the events that indeed occur, you know, and that, yes, during Bulgarian rule, during First and during the Second World War, there were people who were killed. So one of them was the massacre at Račak, I think, where a lot of Bulgarian and VMRO troops basically killed Serbo-Man families. And of course, there's a monument built which calls it, here's where the nasty Bulgarian hand killed so many people, you know. And of course, all of the other opportunities to commemorate resistance, which particularly in 43 and 44, there were some notable signs, not so much and a lot less than in Bulgaria, but some signs of resistance. And of course, the term is Bulgarian fascist occupier. And so Bulgarians have always pointed, listen, there are similar monuments in Greece, neighboring Greece, and there's no need to call it Bulgarian fascist occupiers. All you can say is that Nazis and their allies, Nazis refers to Germans, but we don't call them Germans, we call them Nazis because this was the ideological part, and we call their allies their allies. So Bulgaria put a clear demand that we need to get rid of that Bulgarian fascist occupier and replace it with Nazis and their allies, or something of that sort of nature. Of course, Macedonian society finds that completely unacceptable. Politicians, of course, are completely reluctant to do anything about this, but this is a demand, and it's part of this reconciliation process. And as a part of the reconciliation process, because they look at it, they associate the fascist occupier with me. So I am the fascist occupier. Wait, I was born in 1977. It doesn't matter. I'm the fascist occupier of Macedonia. And this is the nasty Bulgarian hand, with ancestors from Kukush, Well, that's what it is, and this is not a way to build friendly relations. This is not a way to move forward. This is not a way to reconcile, and it remains as a Bulgarian demand. And yes, some modification of those will have to happen. But again, right now, even if you go and modify them, they're going to go and break the new monuments, the modifications of those signs because of the resistance to this attempt, So again, we need to have a discussion in society before that happens. Number 3 is notable progress needs to be made in the work of the Joint Commission on historical, cultural, and educational issues, and a more active engagement by Skopje in it. In other words, we need to have an agreement on major issues of historical past, particularly on what is and how common and shared history operates, and then we will give you a green light. And that is number 3, it stays there. It's also embedded because every year they have to report in the protocols, the accession protocols, they have to report what progress they've made along this path, including on the historical commission's progress. And then that progress is now part of the negotiations framework. Now, Bulgaria could have demanded that even without having that embedded in the negotiations framework, but having that in the negotiation framework and having that as an EU requirement is a good guarantee for Bulgaria. And again, if you expect that this is not going to happen, this can't happen overnight. It did not happen for 30 years, I think the negotiating framework is a good tool and is a good guarantor that that progress on that committee needs to be made. And the 4th one is sort of more of a symbolic, but yet important, that Macedonia should not interfere in Bulgaria's internal affairs and should not directly support UMO Ilinden and Ilinden Pirin, which they have done. They're now more hesitant to do that, and they're more cautious. So I don't think that, but the 1 through 3 are really the central demands, and they are there. They are also incorporated in the negotiating framework.
Okay. No, it's a good. Let me pull the slide away. Yes. So I have a few thoughts on the various Bulgarian requirements. I'm personally much more concerned with a lot of the historical aspects of of those 4, 5 points that we had there pulled up. I mean, because like I said previously, I think that's really the crux of the argument. I mean, when all the debates and the discussions and the back and forth between the two states, between public figures from the two countries, when they have TV debates, stuff like that. I mean, when you were on Canal Pit, Channel 5 over there, that's really the main concern of people is, was Tsar Samuel Bulgarian or Macedonian? Was Goce Delchev Bulgarian or Macedonian? Was Ivan Mikhailov a fascist? It's really the historical aspects of the dispute that are really in the forefront of people's minds. That's really what kind of rubs people the wrong way, is when one side denies the other side's historical truths and whatnot. So I think that should always be the priority, because I think that's, once you solve historical questions, I think everything else kind of falls into place. I mean, just kind of, to address the hate speech aspect of it, because that was one of the points, and that's something we can discuss. But I mean, a lot of the hate speech, if you will, is centered around historical disputes. I'm not just like the top stuff. I mean, that's kind of just a little childish and foolish. But I mean, a lot of the hatred, I think, is because, oh, you're denying our history, you're denying our existence, stuff like that. So I think that's certainly, like I said, needs to be on the main issue resolved before any of the other constitutional amendments and stuff like that. To kind of go back to the quote unquote hate speech, I will push back a little bit on that. Not what you're saying, but just on that demand. And I think this might just be a difference of opinion between Americans and Europeans. As I think now this is also a touchy subject in the past few years in America, the concept of hate speech. But I'm kind of opposed to even that framing. I don't like the concept of hate speech. I'm not gonna say it's not real. Obviously, there's speech directed towards different groups that can be categorized as hateful. I don't think there's any dispute about that. But I think kind of putting in this legalistic category of hate speech is not very beneficial, not just in the Macedonia-Bulgaria dispute, but just generally. I think Americans have again, this has changed in recent years, but Americans typically have had a higher tolerance for open speech, open discussion. For example, I mean, we don't have to kind of get into it specifically, but there are even 20th century historical events that are not just taboo, but outright criminalized in Europe, where no such criminalization exists in the United States. You can discuss anything you want quite openly. And I don't know that it's a good idea to close off certain historical disputes by decree or by, a criminal code or something like that. And I don't know that it's a good idea to criminalize the speech of free individuals within a state. It's one thing for Bulgaria to demand that the Macedonian state, the state institutions, not engage in that type of rhetoric, obviously. But I don't know that it's a good idea to chase down random Facebook or Twitter posters and use that as a criteria to deny, Macedonia's accession to the European Union. Same thing with the historical dispute. I mean, obviously there are going to be people in Macedonia who simply dispute the not just Bulgarian historical position, as it's not simply a Bulgarian historical position, it's a historical position which is adopted throughout the entire world. I mean, recently, I don't know if you watched on we mentioned at Corridor Rosum, Corridor 8, the YouTube channel, they had I think Georgi pulled up like Wikipedia pages. Not that Wikipedia is a
it was a wonderful episode.
Sure,
Yes.
it's Wikipedia is not like the end all be all of historical dispute. Obviously, there's a lot of problems. Some of the citations aren't great. People can change it and whatnot, but it kind of what Georgi did was he went through every country's, because if you go to Wikipedia, obviously each country has their own page. So if you go to Tsar Samuel, which is what he did, obviously in the Macedonian version of Wikipedia, it says he's Macedonian. In the Bulgarian one, it says he's Bulgarian, which obviously that's going to be the case. But then if you pull up Germany's version of Tsar Samuel's, Wikipedia page, it says he's Bulgarian. If you pull up Russia's, he's Bulgarian. In Greek, he's Bulgarian. In Malaysia, he's Bulgarian. In, Ecuador, he's Bulgarian. So, it's not the framing of the Macedonians saying that Bulgarians deny our history or this is simply a Bulgarian narrative doesn't hold water, because every other nation in the world also follows Bulgaria's, historical positions, which is basically means that they're not Bulgarian positions. They're simply objective historical positions. So I think a good demand by Bulgaria would be that Macedonian state institutions, whether it be universities, national historical institutes, even high schools, middle schools, or wherever where history is taught, in the textbooks,
Mhm.
that where the state has a role in the historical narrative, that historical narrative
Mhm.
reflect the objective historical reality, and Bulgaria should stand by the position that by not doing so, you're infringing on Bulgaria's history, and not only on Bulgaria's history, but you're falsifying objective world history. I think that's a fair position to stand behind and make that the primary criteria for EU accession. Now, like I was saying, I don't think Bulgaria should start nitpicking into individual people. Like if a Macedonian wants to write a history book individually, publish it privately, where they say that Tsar Samuel was the king of some Macedonian empire or whatever. That's not Bulgaria's position to get involved in the private lives of Macedonian citizens, regardless of how absurd those positions may be.
I
Same thing with
agree.
the hate speech stuff. I mean, if some individuals are saying things in Macedonia, they're not state actors. They're simply free citizens of Macedonia. I don't find that to be a persuasive reason to block accession into the
Mhm.
European Union. I think it should focus on the narratives of the state positions, and so forth. So, like I said, I don't particularly care for the legal concept of hate speech. I just think it infringes on personal liberty. But when state institutions are actively engaging in it or putting forward false narratives, I think that there it crosses the line, and that's the point at which Bulgaria should make that a prerequisite for EU accession. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
This is a very good point. And what my just one sentence said, I completely agree with you. And creating this police and some sort of like a commission or committee that is going to
right,
monitor what people say. I actually don't mind. There's like a whole bunch of Facebook groups that are dedicated particularly to fighting Bulgarians and Macedonians, kind of throwing it at each other,
sure.
and I to be honest, I also was in one of those groups member. I've left, and I don't want to join any of those.
It's fun for a
And
while, but then it gets frustrating.
no, but I mean, I think sometimes I go and check to see what's going on. And I think
Sure.
at this point, they've had for like 2 years cursing at each other, offending
Yeah.
each other, and now they're kind of getting tired of that.
Yeah.
So if you keep it that going for a couple more years, they will get so tired that they won't have the energy and the tenacity to do. But and I also got to use that they offended me,
Sure.
Janissary, traitor. And that's fine. I try not to respond in any way, although sometimes it can be offensive. And then when they see that you're not entering in their sort of pattern of offending each other and throwing at each other, they kind of get tired, and it's kind of gets boring, and it's like they're not interested to do that. So you're right. You're exactly right. This needs to be said through. We need to speak it out,
Mhm.
and this should not be restricted. I agree with you. And in the end of the day, what you can do is you can ask them, is this the way you communicate with somebody, but not engage in sort of restrictive and prohibitive speech. So I agree with you that freedom of speech is a fundamental freedom and
Right.
should be protected. What I do believe that, and in the same thing, like I don't think we should be too pushy on, oh, let's change the signs on the monuments now, because again, society is not going to accept it. What's going to happen if they change the sign, somebody else is going to throw it and write something on it or destroy it. So this needs to take, first of all, we need to have this debate within the Macedonian society. What we can do, and you're doing a fantastic job to present the evidence to them, to get them think through critically, and also to push the government authorities to foster that debate in society, including through textbooks, but also using the media as a forum for discussion. That which is why I agreed, and which is why I am okay with going in Macedonian media with all the risks that it takes,
Right.
and challenges, because it's important to foster this debate. But ultimately, it's the debate that needs to take place in their society, and it's going through all the stages of denialism. But I think at one point, it's just a stage that we need to go through. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a risk of, let's say, Bulgaria being too quote unquote pushy might have a negative effect, is where people's defense
Mhm.
mechanisms get triggered and then they're just combative because they, even if they, internally think that the Bulgarian narrative on some historical figures or some historical events is correct, they don't want to be pushed into that position
Yeah.
by an outside actor. And I think that's another reason why I think the um, some of the constitutional changes that Bulgaria is requiring, like adding Bulgarians to the preamble of the constitution, is seen by a lot of Macedonians, for better or worse, as an overreach. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how we feel about it, it is one outside state trying
Yeah.
to determine the constitution or rewrite the constitution of a sovereign state. I
Mhm.
mean, it is a bit of an overreach, if we're being honest. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean,
Mhm.
I think the Macedonians are fair to say, what business is it of another country to determine
Mhm.
what our constitution says? I mean, they're not completely off base uh by putting forward that position. I mean, I get it to an extent. Um, and I think that, to kind of go back to specifically like the European accession
Mhm.
process, I think the more Bulgaria pushes on it, more Macedonians, it seems to me, are saying, well, if these are going to be the demands, we don't even want to negotiate with
Mhm.
Bulgaria. We don't even want to enter the European Union under
Mhm.
these circumstances. And I think, maybe that has a negative effect. Let me ask you kind of on that topic, to Macedonians who maybe are opposed to entering the European Union, or at least under these conditions. And maybe you can even speak to Bulgarians who obviously are in larger numbers voting for parties like Revival, that are more anti-European. What is the benefit? I know we're kind of changing topics here a little bit, but that's kind of the nature of this show. We had a lot of topics to discuss, and let me just kind of ask you, as someone who, obviously you're a professor, you deal with a lot of international affairs, foreign affairs type subjects. What would you argue is the main benefit to Macedonians, Bulgarians, people in the Balkan in general? What is the benefit of EU membership? What is to be gained?
Mhm.
For example, let's say I'm skeptical of the European Union. How would you sell the idea of the European Union to me? What am I, let's say, as a Macedonian, even though I don't live there, I'm not a Macedonian citizen, but for the sake of argument, what is to be gained? What is the benefit to me with EU membership?
Well, so there's a couple of things. First of all, is uh, it's an integrated market, the largest single market in the world, with 400 and I think was about 400 million people. Britain leaving the EU, and so if you are not a part of the EU, uh, and as an integrated market, it ensures the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. That means pretty much it removes the borders, and just like the state of Indiana or the state of Ohio, is integrated into the single market space called the United States of America. So would Macedonia, Bulgaria, Croatia, any other countries would be part of that space. So why is it important? First of all, because you have a lot bigger competition now happening. That may be challenging for a lot of domestic manufacturing or domestic industries for at first. That's why adjustment is necessary. But in the end of the day, if you are particularly uh, a poorer country, like Bulgaria, like Macedonia, like Serbia, like Albania, former Yugoslavia, any of the former Yugoslavia, except maybe Slovenia. What happens is your cheaper cost of labor with ceteris paribus, with level playing field, becomes a more attractive place to move a lot of investments from places like France, from Germany, um, Austria, Italy, to places, whether it's your manufacturing of automobiles, whether it's high-tech industry, technological industries, or any industries that have particularly added value. Second is the quality of the services that you are going to get is going to be a lot better because there's competition, and also because there's a uniform rules, that you will need to comply with. And what happens is, as a result of the integration, there's this thing called the Harold Balassa-Samuelson effect. Once a country joins, over time, its wages go up, just because all this investment moves into that country, comes into that country. Of course, inflation is initially higher, but wages go up, and they're converging, they're catching up with the core, the wealthiest countries in the area. So we saw that with Ireland, particularly when they joined in the 1970s, and we also saw that with Spain, Portugal, and Greece. Well, Greece is not a good example. Probably is the only exception or deviation where they've had a really slow catching up convergence because of the 2009 financial crisis. But we've also seen today that the Czechs, the Poles, the Slovaks, the Baltic countries, they have now higher than Greece GDP. Some of them have surpassed even Portugal and are nearing Spain, which is, and that's how they have benefited in their 18 years, I should say, 19 years of EU membership now. So it's a real thing. Even Bulgaria and Romania, I said that at Samo Vistina, that when Bulgaria started negotiations process in 99, the cost of living in Bulgaria was, and the salaries were half of the salaries in Macedonia, in North Macedonia. Today, everything in Sofia costs probably twice as much salaries, or even more than twice higher than in Macedonia. So I like to go to Skopje just because everything is so cheap there, Sure. And people are overall very nice, not the political elites, but the people on the street are like, I'm at home there, I don't see the difference between being on the streets of Sofia. By the way, the curses that they use at the stadiums are exactly identical to the curses that they use at soccer stadiums in Sofia. In Plovdiv, in Varna, and Burgas, you will see different curses than in Stara Zagora. But in Sofia, they're identical to the curses in Skopje. So, except the one that is targeting the blood of your political opponent, your opponent. Yeah. So that's the one.
Well, that's thing. Because from the Macedonians, they'll say that's because the people in Sofia are all Macedonians, right?
Which is true. About 70%. Well, it used to be 70. Now it's maybe like 40% are descendants from people who originated, and that's true. There's a compact area. But the number two thing that I want to say is that because Macedonia, just like Bulgaria, North Macedonia, just like Bulgaria, and most of East European countries are poorer, they have designated funding through different programs. One is to build your highways, railroads, and infrastructure generally. It's called Accession funds. And then they have also targeted funds for development, whether it's for small and medium enterprises, for regional development, particularly areas that are underfunded. So, for example, Ohrid, how will Ohrid benefit? Ohrid will benefit tremendously because it has a big problem with the UNESCO heritage these days. It's not maintained well enough, but because Macedonia will automatically qualify as one when it joins North Macedonia, or two of the poorest countries, it'll get a lot of regional development funds. And with those regional development funds, a lot of money can be invested into preserving the old houses, particularly in the Varosha neighborhood of Ohrid, cleaning of the Ohrid Lake, which is also a problem. And there can be a lot of so first, this is free money, or 80% EU, 20% national or other sources of funding, and it's going to create a lot of employment, but it's going to really raise up the quality of Ohrid as a city, as a town to live, the environmental situation. So it's roughly, we anticipate that it's going to be between 2,000 and 4,000 euro per citizen in the next 7-year framework. that North Macedonia will get. It's not like here's your 2,000 euros,
Right.
but here is the money that you can use to finish, to complete infrastructure, to do water treatment, for regional development, sort of to do literally water lines and what's that called, water treatment plants and all this stuff. So this really makes a difference. And for example, Sofia used the funds to build its subway system. Now it has 3 lines, a pretty sophisticated system, literally over a period of a decade, and that really had a good impact. The city is much more communicable these days. You can move from, but it's also, the other thing is, it also has helped improve the environmental situation, because people are not driving as much in the city. Streets are not as congested as they used to be, or as the streets in Skopje are, and that's because people are using the subway system.
Let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. You mentioned, obviously all the European funding investments. I think you mentioned that would, increase or give employment opportunities within the country. But one could also look at other Balkan states, not even just Balkan states, but former communist states. I think the Baltics are also a good example of this, where EU integration has essentially drained a lot of the population of those countries. For example, if we just look at Bulgaria or Croatia, I think Latvia, Lithuania are also very the bad in this aspect, where by opening the door to the European Union, you see a lot of the smartest, most capable individuals in those states leaving, going to places like Austria, Germany, Spain, France, what have you, which one could argue has a negative effect on the country. For example, Bulgaria has seen a quite dramatic population decline. So has
the fastest
Croatia.
in the world, the fastest in the world.
Right. So could one not make the argument that European integration has robbed Bulgaria of its human capital and is putting it on track to, be less successful for that reason? How would you answer that criticism of that aspect of European integration?
Well, so yes, that's a fact. When you get into an integrated market space, even though there's 7-year transitional period where you have some restrictions, but ultimately that transition ends, and now your workforce can work pretty much on the equal footing all through the EU. Many people, particularly folks from the medical professions, but also all kinds of professions, frankly, are leaving, looking for better opportunities, for better employment opportunities. And yes, that has a negative impact. But again, I've put a lot of thinking into this. I don't think that is avoidable. And the bigger the gap is, and between Macedonia and Bulgaria now, it's twice the gap. And it could continue to grow, frankly, if North Macedonia doesn't join within the next 10 years or so. So the bigger that gap grows, actually, once the country joins the EU, the greater number of people will be looking, just because there's a big differential in the income level. But you have to also look from a different angle. Keeping people locked in, in a small country, and restricting their opportunities to look for employment elsewhere, it could keep them, but it's not going to make their quality of life better, especially if the economy is not growing quickly. Vucic is using some of that arguments for Serbia. Oh, if we hold on to the EU membership, then we could preserve the population and catch up, grow economically, reach the EU level without being part of the EU. I don't think that's a viable alternative for 2 reasons. Number one is, once you're outside of the EU, even as a candidate country, you don't get access to the same amount of funds that you have in the EU. Now, if you're in the EU and you have access to those funds, that also provides a lot of opportunities for political elites to steal that money, through no-bid contracts or to sort of staging stuff. And that's one of the allegations that Borisov has faced, that the 10 years that he's been in power, he has used that. I'm not saying this is the case, but this is an allegation that has been brought in a number of election campaigns in the last few years. But the other thing is, so people are going to move. First, people are not going to be happy if they live in this country. And second, if you don't join the EU, they're going to move anyway. And third is today, if you look at Macedonia, the rate of population decline is about the same as Bulgaria, even maybe Bulgaria is a little bit higher. But if you look at the survey, public opinion, most Bulgarians who live and work in Bulgaria now are happy. And there's a good number of them that are working, particularly short-term employments in the EU, particularly low-level, low-qualified jobs, that they're looking into an opportunities to return to Bulgaria. So the return rate is higher, and then people who want to leave is a lot lower. In Macedonia, on the other hand, I think was something like 80% of the young people want to look for careers. In Bulgaria, I think this was more like 20 or 30% are looking for careers overseas. So that's because you already have the opportunity. So people who wanted to leave the country have left. They've worked, they've gained. So the other thing is, I mean, a young person in their early career, why shouldn't they go and live in Spain or in Germany or anywhere? They're going to learn the language. They're going to develop skills. They're going to, just like, somebody who's grown up in the suburbs of Chicago, say they go to LA or to New York to do their career in the United States. Why should we restrict them? I mean, people are living most of the Midwest, to move to California or the West Coast, to the South, of the United States. So population shifts, you got to look at the big picture, it's happening. But I also look at this as an opportunity. Even those who have gone to work there, they've gotten experience, they've learned the language, they've gotten a better idea how the world operates in the EU country where they have moved to live. So I think this is actually a good thing,
But they're not coming back, are they?
It varies. Now, if you're a highly qualified professional, people like, let's say myself, it's very hard to leave your career where you've been successful, particularly if the quality of life is better. But but some people who work like contractors, lots of Bulgarians have been going in the last 10 years to work as contractors. They come. They work for some time in Bulgaria. They go to live in Europe. They come back, so they're in and out. I've had contractors working on one of my properties in Bulgaria. They're like this, and a lot of them are basically ethnic Turks also, or Pomaks, Torbeshi, what you call them. Right. So so for them, that's a good opportunity. And truck drive. My cousin is a truck driver. Half of the time they drive. They're not happy. It's a tough job, but hey, they make a lot more money than they would be making in Bulgaria, and they're in and out. So by being part of that integrated process, you're actually having an opportunity. And the trucker driving in the EU makes roughly as much as a trucker who's contracted and working in the United States, so, or equitable. So the pay is a lot better. Just trucking only in Bulgaria, or if you have a company, that you don't make nearly as much. But a trucker driving internationally inside the EU, it's making good money, and quality of life has improved because these people have now a lot more money in their pockets. And again, what I've seen also another my cousin's son, he got his degree in the Netherlands at University of Eindhoven, and in IT, and he didn't need to go and look for employment because Sofia is actually one of the IT centers in the EU, and he said, like, I'm getting great pay. Cost of living is still more reasonable than other European cities. there was no motivation for him to look for opportunities outside. And so that's the formula to retain young people in Bulgaria, by raising the standards. We're not there yet, and yes, the population decline, and the population decline will continue in Bulgaria just because the demographic structure has deteriorated because of the 30 years of transition. And so we will continue to expect to see the population decline in the next years, unfortunately. There are a lot of old people, not enough young people, and of course, still not attractive for migrants, which is okay. And Bulgarians are relatively hospitable, but not so much to migrants, as you probably have gotten a sense of. So, and that's okay. But so we will continue to have this population decline, and there's no way out of it, and every country, either outside of the EU, is doomed to experience that. That's my take on migration and population.
Sure. All right, so let's move away from the EU a little bit to a much better part of the world, the United States of America. I know you have some news to bring us about the activities of the Bulgarian community here in the United States, particularly in some of the Midwestern states. So what have you guys been up to?
So we, I should say, the broad and diverse Bulgarian community spread around the Midwest has been active in getting some recognition for ourselves as a community. That includes not just Bulgarians from Bulgaria, but also Macedonian Bulgarians. And last several weeks, because last month was March, was the month of the Bulgarian national holiday. And on that occasion, actually, the first time the flag was raised, so the flag has been raised in Chicago for last, I think, 17 or 18 years, but the first time it was raised under the two songs, Izgrei Zorana Svobodata, Rise the Son of Freedom, which was actually the national anthem of the Imaro under Todor Alexandrov, and it was the first official anthem of Macedonia, at that time, Asno Macedonia.
Right.
And so the flag was brought to the brought into the plaza, into Daily Plaza in Chicago, under the Izgrei Zorana Svobodata, and then it was raised under the national anthem of Bulgaria. So it recognized the 120th anniversary of the Ilinden uprising, and on that particular occasion, it showed also the connection that exists between Bulgarians and the Macedonian Bulgarians, or the Macedonian Bulgarians. On that occasion, and I must also express my gratitude to our Consul General in Chicago, Svetoslav Stankov, who supported the Bulgarian community in initiating several different steps. And one of those steps was the adoption of several legislative acts of resolutions in the House and in the Senate of the state of Illinois, which recognized March as the month of Bulgarians, and on the occasion of the 145th anniversary of the liberation of Bulgaria, and it recognized the legacy of the Bulgarians, the Macedonian Bulgarians as well, and a number of individuals. And so I remember you were very concerned, and we all, I think, were, when that HR 741 was introduced in the U.S. House. That was killed. But we were able to have the state of Illinois, both the Senate and the House, separately pass resolutions. And in one of those resolutions, particularly the Macedonian and Macedonian Bulgarian speaking communities, I want to read several paragraphs. Sure. One was that when tens of thousands of Bulgarians arrived in the United States from the geographic region of Macedonia at the beginning of the 20th century, pursuing freedom and fleeing the devastations and horrors occasioned by regional unrest, different conflicts that we saw in the 20th century, recognized also that Madison is the home of Illinois' oldest Bulgarian Orthodox Church, Holy Trinity, built by Macedonian Bulgarians, with the current church building still in place since 1910, that the Granite City, recognizing that was the place where the first Bulgarian newspaper to the United States was published, and that it was also that the place where Macedonian Tribune, the MPO, has been published since 1927. The Bulgarian immigrants from the region of Macedonia founded the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, so special recognition for MPO, the organization that continues to work for human, civil, and economic rights of all individuals, regardless of ethnicity, who hail from that geographic region. And it also recognizes that the Macedonian Bulgarian, Stoyan Christov, something that you also paid close attention to in one of your videos, for which we're very grateful. As a community, a journalist from the Chicago Daily News wrote a book titled "This Is My Country," a semi-autobiographical book about the immigrants arriving in the United States from the southeastern Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, and a book found on the bedside table of the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time of his death. And it also has a special recognition for the role that Bulgarian people played in resisting Nazis to deport Bulgarian Jews from Bulgaria proper and rescuing approximately 50,000 Bulgarian Jews. But also, in all fairness, the Bulgarian people acknowledge with sadness, grief, and regret the deportation and confinement of over 11,000 Jews from Bulgarian-administered Thracian and Macedonian territories during the war. So I think this was, and there's of course recognition of a number of other Bulgarians, the current Bulgarian partnership with the United States and close relations, the state of Ohio. The governor signed a proclamation doing the same text, and also recognizing in that proclamation that the legacy of the Kirchiev brothers, which is the Cincinnati Chile, belongs basically to the Bulgarian, the Macedonian, and the Greek culture, and they themselves recognize them as Macedonian Bulgarians, or Macedonian Bulgarians. So I think this is a very firm recognition, a very important symbolical, but not only symbolical gesture to the Bulgarians and Macedonian Bulgarians all over the globe. And I hope those of us who watch, particularly those who identify with Macedonian Bulgarian identity, that proclamation, the Ohio Proclamation and the resolution from the state of Illinois will make them proud, because we are proud of them and their legacy.
Right. No, that's excellent developments. And like all things the UMD does, their activities always backfire on them somehow. They're always too incompetent to achieve their goals and end up provoking a counter response, which ends up being much more successful than what they were trying to do in the first place. Obviously, their attempts in the U.S. Congress failed spectacularly, and motivated a lot of the Bulgarians and Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States to launch their own initiatives. And now we have recognition by two separate states in the U.S., which are, larger, more important states, let's say, Illinois and Ohio, who recognize the concept of a Macedonian Bulgarian, the legacy of the Bulgarians from Macedonia, their role in American history, and so forth. So I think, a lot of people were arguing that the concept of a Macedonian Bulgarian is outdated. It's, the MPO is an outdated organization. The way forward is, this kind of UMD, ethnic Macedonian. Not that there's anything wrong with being an ethnic Macedonian, but the narratives that specific organization was putting out is kind of the way forward. And we see that's not true. In fact, they're incapable of achieving their goals. And in fact, we, if I may be so bold to say, we are actually much better at achieving those goals and asserting our identity and whatnot here in the United States. So I think those are excellent achievements, and I think more states will follow suit. And I think Ohio, if they put out a resolution, I think it was I can't remember when last year, but in a sense, their more recent resolution seems to have kind of backtracked and corrected a lot of the a lot of the statements put forward in the purely kind of Macedonist resolution, because I mean, you're more familiar with the Ohio developments than I am, but for example, the Kitagia brothers, I think in the first Ohio resolution, they kind of indicated they were ethnic Macedonians, which is not the case. The descendants of the Kitagia brothers, there's videos of them on YouTube specifically stating that they are ethnic Bulgarians from Macedonia. So I think the new resolution clarifies that fact. And I don't know if you're still with us, Ivan. Your screen froze. All right, we are back after a short interruption there. Apologies to the audience, but yeah, before we lost connection there, we were talking about the Bugarash counteroffensive to the UMD forces. No, as I was saying before we kind of got interrupted, it's really fascinating to me how badly the UMD has done in its Macedonist efforts. I mean, not just the UMD, but also kind of the entire Macedonist project. I mean, starting with Skopje 2014, the whole, you know, ancient Macedonism, Antiquization project. I mean, what a lot of Macedonists seem to do is kind of provoke the other side, but they're not really capable of really securing a victory. So what they do is they just provoke a reaction that's more than they're able to deal with, and then they end up losing. For example, you know, with a lot of the ancient Macedonia stuff, they kind of provoked Greece, you know, thinking they were somehow going to assert their ancient, you know, Macedonism, but ended up backfiring so badly that they ended up having to renounce all claims to ancient Macedonia, which, you know, is maybe a little bit too much, but they kind of provoked that counter reaction by the Greeks. They ended up having to change the name to North Macedonia, which at one point in time was contemplated only as an, for external purposes, for international purposes, but ended up being a name used internally as well. Same thing with Bulgaria, and same thing here in the United States. I mean, their attempts to kind of rewrite the history of the Macedonian Bulgarians here in the United States ended up backfiring, where they lost their congressional resolution. And not only did they lose it, but they ended up provoking the Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States to, you know, organize themselves more aggressively and have their own projects, their own resolutions, which, as you discussed, ended up succeeding in Illinois and Ohio, and will continue to kind of domino throughout other states in which there's a Macedonian Bulgarian presence. So, what's your opinion on that? I mean, how do you kind of view the dispute, or the kind of the battleground here in the United States on that front?
So I want to say very clearly that I don't see this as a literally a war or a confrontation with Macedonists. Again, they're our brothers and sisters. They have their own identity and they believe in a narrative different than ours. But we still look at them as our brothers and sisters, you know, as weird as it sounds, with different identities, recognizing the difference in their identities. We did not intend in any way to score, to even any scores, or do it. For us, it was important because of the legacy of who we are and what our ancestors were, but also because of the overall legacy of this tens of thousands of people who came to North America. And we just wanted to get we wanted to get them recognized, along with our more recent present-day immigration from Bulgarian from the Balkans into the United States. And we also wanted to make sure that to get the record straight. And I was engaged last year with visits to our elected representatives to explain them why some of the narrative was inaccurate and misrepresented.
Right.
I did not use intentionally the word falsified, and why it is a concern for us. And I found incredibly easy and persuasive, much more so when discussing with Macedonists, to show the evidence and to engage in a meaningful conversation about our own concerns. So at that point, we had the idea that we needed to have something that sort of both recognizes the Bulgarian American, and Macedonian Bulgarian American communities, and also we wanted to make sure that this also will hopefully bring Bulgarians together and Macedonian Bulgarians together. I've said that many times to many people. I would like to partner with Macedonians, present-day Macedonians, not necessarily with Macedonists, or at least not with people who are convinced in the Macedonist approach and not trying to impose it and find some sort of recognition, but with everyone else who has identity different than mine and ours. It's totally okay. And I would like to see more actually areas of cooperation on the grounds of mutual understanding and mutual respect, and I think this will happen. We've had some ideas to enhance and expand such cooperation, and I think as things are moving forward, these opportunities will become more abundant and more prevalent. The fact that we have been able to bring new life to the NPO has now renewed leadership with Tommy Ivanov. With this, he's brought a lot of passion and enthusiasm. And I even listened yesterday to a couple of days ago, I think it was former Prime Minister Lupcho Georgievsky was talking about NPO on Macedonian TVs and says, like, listen, these are our people and this is our organization. And I think NPO could be a wonderful bridge to partner with Bulgarian Americans on the one hand, and then Macedonians on the other hand. In the end of the day, I remember again, NPO approached one of our Bulgarian honorary consul in Cincinnati and trying to convince him about some of their projects. And the Bulgarian consul, honorary consul here, George Vredevel, he told him, listen, from what I understand, Bulgarians and Macedonians are not that different. They have the same interests, the same passions, the same very similar cultures, but also, immigrant communities have the same frustrations and the same challenges, and maybe we want to make sure that we work to overcome those and partner and create more vibrant opportunities. And I think this tension, the period of tension and the period of fighting over history will get settled. It may take us longer than we think it would, but ultimately it'll settle. And when the score is settled, when the storm is over with, I think there is potential for cooperation, both between Bulgaria and Macedonia in Europe and in the Balkans, and between the Bulgarian American and the Macedonian Bulgarians and the Macedonian community here in United States as well.
I think you're being a little too nice and too diplomatic. No, I'm just joking, but I think for example, in Illinois, when I did my video on the MPO, which was a little over a year ago, I think, when I did the history of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization here in the United States, a lot of the early developments of the MPO happened in the state of Illinois, and a lot of the historical references that I used were not, Bulgarians themselves, but historians from the state of Illinois who were writing about their own state's history. And, the American historians, I think, accurately documented that the early immigrants from Macedonia to come to the United States and to the state of Illinois were ethnically Bulgarian. So I think from the Macedonist position, you're actually trying to get the American historians to kind of rewrite their own history, which they're not willing to do. I mean, by their very own, again, this goes back to the idea of an objective history. The historians here in the United States know the history of their own country, who came here. It's very well documented in their own state archives, in their own history books. So all they have to do is look back at their own history to see who these people were. So I think that's another aspect of, whether it's the UMD or other similar organizations or people kind of fighting an uphill battle, where it's kind of difficult to argue your side of historical narrative when there is an objective history out there that doesn't go in your favor. And I think that's why they're always going to lose, is because, again, no one really buys into their historical narratives, and ultimately I think their project is doomed to fail. Now, I don't wish any to go back to your olive branch to the Macedonians. I do not dislike the Macedonians. I'm a Macedonian. I have Macedonian friends. This isn't a personal attack towards the people. This is a struggle against a historical narrative, against an ideology which is not natural to the Macedonian people. This is an artificial narrative ideology that's imposed on them, and that's continues to be put forward by some unfortunate Macedonians who cannot let go of that falsified history. And I think it's what I'm trying to do on my channel, what other people such as yourself who kind of enter the public space on these topics are trying to do, is simply correct, preserve the accurate historical narrative, and allow the Macedonians and the Bulgarians to move forward once that ideology is kind of put to rest. This is not in any way an attack on Macedonia, the Macedonians, or anything like that. But this is not an attack on the concept of an ethnic Macedonian or anything along those lines. This is simply just attempting to set the record straight. And I think we will be successful in this struggle because ultimately the facts and the truth are on our side. And all it takes is us to bring those facts to light. And that's why ultimately we're destined to win and they're destined to lose.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say 2 words in support. If you want to show, I had prepared actually the 2 slides from the first batch, the 3rd and the 4th slide, just to confirm of what you're saying is, Kirill, and I thank you for putting it beautifully. Again, if we go and look up it, yes, this is the site. The gold standard for political for scholars of ethnicities and nationalities is a professor who was ethnic Croat, who developed his career and finished his PhD at Stanford and taught for a long time at Yale, Professor Ivanov. And he wrote a book, The National Question on Yugoslavia, again published it in the United States by Cornell University Press. We cited in the last video, last time I was a guest, Ipek Usmanoglu's work on blood ties. And I'm going to quote just one little paragraph to illustrate how the Western thought, Western political science, Western scholarship, historians who are not involved in any way in this debate approach the issue of a Macedonian nationhood and the Macedonian identity. And so this is from page 327. The idea of a separate Slavic Macedonian nationhood most certainly had its antecedents before 1930s. So remember, you and I had this conversation. We're trying to split hairs between 1913 and 1919, Not, nor is that surprising considering the political history of the area. Krstyo Misirkov, 1874 to 1926, the first creator of a clear and rounded representation of argued and systematic conception about the national essence of the Macedonian people, brought arguments in favor of the Macedonian national separatism in Zamakedonskite Raboti about Macedonian affairs, but still considers the Macedonian question a part of the larger Bulgar complex, if not for other reasons than linguistic. The pattern of Misirkov's national behavior would become rather common among Macedonian intellectuals of the 1930s. So for him, the intellectual inspiration starts in the 1930s. They were Bulgars in struggles against the Serbian and Greek hegemony, but within the Bulgar world, they were increasingly becoming exclusive Macedonians. On the one hand, there was Misirkov's pan-Bulgar patriotism, which was based largely on the kinship of language, and his pan-Bulgar positions, which he used moreover, frontally against the Serbs and before them the Greeks. On the other, however, when it concerned the national and cultural differentiation within this framework of the Bulgarophone unit, understood more in philological than in ethnic way, there were his Macedonian patriotism and his Macedonian positions, and so when you look at the sources and that evidence, and we read also last time original documents, it clearly shows you that certain narrative sort of dominates, and overwhelms. And it's not very difficult when citing some of the most renowned scholars and the gold standard for nations and nationalities to find evidence in support of what you and I have been talking about. And what I want to say here is just two additional sentences here, is that I think, and here is I agree with Kanzurov and his interview, that it's indeed the history is the primary source, and
Right.
the responsibility of the Bulgarian government and the Bulgarian historians, which have not been careful enough, is instead of doing the easier thing to focus on human rights directly. And it's important to talk about human rights. It's important to talk about Pendikov. It's important to talk about why aren't you, shame on you for declaring yourself Bulgarian,
Right.
or it's not worth to call police for a Bulgarian. This is important. And this is important to focus, but it's also important to focus, why is it shame for you to declare yourself Bulgarian, or why is it not worth to call a police for a Bulgarian? We, people who are from outside, unless we tell them that we have descendants from Macedonia, are okay. There's no big problem with this. The problem is when you claim you were born, you grew up in this country, and you defined yourself as a Bulgarian or Macedonian Bulgarian, or you tell I had my ancestors, and my ancestors from Kukush were Macedonian Bulgarians. That is where the problem starts. And again, the problem of human rights is linked directly to the problem of identity. The problem is that this narrative, inaccurate narrative, is imposed upon the Macedonian society, and in the last 30 years there have been little to no efforts to bring a discussion to modify it. So here is a problem of democracy and a problem of human rights that is directly linked to the historical record, and that is why the historical narrative needs to be rectified, needs to be straightened up, and needs to be fixed. And it has two major implications, both one for Macedonian society itself, and second, it has major implication on the relations with Bulgaria. Relations with Bulgaria are difficult because of the historical narrative.
Right.
The accusations that Bulgaria does not recognize Macedonian identity, language, etc., are all rooted in this narrative, that justifies this argument to be developed. But most importantly, it also has a major problem in the domestic environment, because Macedonian society is very, I don't know how many have, or some of you hopefully are coming from there or have interacted with it. People are very nervous there. When you talk on the streets, they're extremely frustrated. The society itself is deeply divided, and there's like the group of the patriots, and the other groups are the traitors, the janissaries, the quislings, and half of Macedonians, people who were born from the geographic region of Macedonia, just because they declared themselves Bulgarian at one point, have been declared as public enemies number one, traitors, Ivan Mikhailov being one of them, and they're bad just because of their Bulgarian identity, or Macedonian Bulgarian identity on the one hand. And then on the other hand, there's the other half, a large part of them have also declared themselves as Bulgarian. Like we read Damegruev. Damegruev, the founder, the person who is in the national anthem, he says, we are basically single nation, us Bulgarians and their brothers, the Macedonians and their brothers, single nation brothers.
And that's one of the biggest paradoxes and kind of contradictions is, from Macedonia's point of view, I'm a traitor because I acknowledge, the Bulgarian the shared history with Bulgaria, the Bulgarian identity of people in the past. So I'm a traitor for that. But then Dame Gruev, Goce Delchev, all the rest of them are the heroes of Macedonia, even though they believe the exact same thing. So there's that paradox going on there in the ideology of Macedonism. Even I looked at some of the slides you sent over, and unfortunately, I think there's packed in those slides is the discussion for many future videos. I think there's a lot of things that we could discuss today, but I think would be probably best served for separate videos in and of themselves. I know you sent some stuff over related to historical matters. I think we could definitely do a separate historical video. I think the audience would very much enjoy that. Some slides also you sent over on, whether Bulgaria actually does deny, the Macedonian identity, stuff like that. I think we could definitely do a separate video on the kind of specifically the Bulgarian position on the Macedonian question in more detail. I think we covered a lot in this video on some of the current event stuff. So I think this is probably a good place to start wrapping up. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to add before we kind of wrap up the discussion for this evening?
Just to complete this last thought and sentence is that the importance, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to your viewers. It's really important to have this honest conversation in Macedonia. This is a conversation that's in North Macedonia, in their society. And it's really important to move away from the stage of denial to the stage of understanding the foundation of the troubles, and ultimately, as a result of this conversation, what I hope to see, and as a result of the work of the Historical Commission, but also from the inside out, a process by which this narrative that is built right now, that divides heavily the society, and it kind of alienates neighboring closest nations, mostly Bulgarians, but there are also others, that this narrative starts to change, and the idea behind changing and rewriting and rethinking the narrative is that a more inclusive narrative will help basically heal Macedonians from this internal divisions, will help build bridges with neighboring nations. And what would ultimately help is this is what is going to strengthen Macedonian identity. I know why Macedonian historians, and I'm looking at them and talking to them straight up. I know why you don't want this letter from Dame Gruev to be publicized. I know why you deny the very existence of this letter and you call me and everybody else Bulgarians falsifiers, because you are concerned that Macedonian identity, if all this evidence comes to surface and it's accepted in Macedonian historiography, that Macedonian identity is going to go away, and all of a sudden Macedonians are going to wake up in the morning and become Bulgarians. I'll tell you, no, that's not going to happen. We're way past the stage where that reversal, way beyond that, past the reversal stage. The identity is built, and I have no intention, and I think most of us don't have any intention to modify. What we do need is this conversation to change the narrative in a more inclusive way to help heal the nation. And by healing the nation, the Macedonian society, we're also going to strengthen Macedonian identity, but not on an anti-Bulgarian foundation, on a pro-Bulgarian, pro-Albanian, pro-Serbian, pro-Greek, pro-everybody, and really genuinely Macedonian identity. And if somebody wants to think of themselves as Bulgarian, that's fine, but not because this will strengthen Macedonia. So what I'm helping you with this conversation is strengthen your identity and overcome this deficiency. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, that's actually a very excellent point. And I've kind of made a similar one in the past where the point of all this isn't to destroy the Macedonian identity. It's like you said, to strengthen it, because currently the Macedonian identity that's built on the I don't want to say this, the untruths of Macedonism actually makes the Macedonian identity the national identity, the ethnic identity, much weaker, because it rests it on an unstable foundation of, false narratives, false facts and whatnot. But if we kind of step back and have more of an objective analysis using objective facts, putting forward the objective historical process of Macedonian ethnogenesis, which we discussed in the previous video, it will actually firm up the foundations and stabilize the foundations of the Macedonian ethnic identity to where they're not flimsy like they are today. Because once they're based on the true historical narrative, on the true process of ethnogenesis, which did occur in Macedonia, then there's really nothing to fear at that point, and the ethnic Macedonian identity as it could become will be much more stable, much stronger than it is today, because it will actually be based in facts instead of lies. So I think you're absolutely correct to state that what we're attempting to do is not destroy the Macedonian ethnic identity or to weaken it, but to strengthen it by rooting it in truth instead of falsehood. So I think that's an excellent point you made, and an excellent place to wrap up this discussion. So once again, I thank you very much for coming back on the channel. I anticipate you coming back in the future and discussing the many other topics which we can discuss, and whether it's current events, historical, and all that. So thanks again for coming on the channel, and wish you all the best, and hope to see you again in the near future.
Thank you so much, Kirill, and best of luck to you and your viewers. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.